Nick, you introduced me to the Waking Up app right when it got started, and I so appreciate that because, it's helped me quite a bit. Tell me why you listen to it still after all these years.
Well, it's clear to me that the Waking Up app is different than any of the other meditation and mindfulness apps, primarily for the reason that it has such a wide variety of advanced teachers with a breadth of knowledge that's sort of unparalleled, especially when you get to the area of non-dualism. So you have people like, of course, Locke Kelly, Adyashanti, and Joseph Goldstein from Insight. And I think these are teachers that you don't hear, first of all, on other apps. And it also takes the listener into deeper concepts like, the illusion of the self and emptiness and impermanence that are really important and are really the core of any mindfulness training program, in my opinion, but that you just don't see on those other apps. And those are areas that you need to go into if you want to further your practice.
Right. And every time I open the app, I see a new teacher. I just was listening to James Lowe and him talking about how thoughts are fleeting, which mirrored some things that I was reading in a book by Thich Nhat Hanh that I had picked up at the library. Just every time I it's almost like I'm triangulating all this information from all over the place, and it's so helpful to hear it reiterated in a different voice even, that helps me just put that information in context and also apply it to my life. And we do that on a daily basis. I mean, I'm so thankful that I have you at work, that I'm my Dharma buddy, that we can discuss these things. But having these things available to us online is just an incredible resource, and I'm so grateful.
Yeah, it really is. And I think that, again, the thing about the Waking Up app is that I think, as a human being in 2023, you want to get into better mind states. And that's why so many people in LA, they're going to yoga classes, going to mindfulness classes. But there's only a point that only goes so far where you've put yourself in a different mind state. You're calmer, you have better heart rate, right? And, you're chasing after these experiences. But prior to that, which has been talked about so much on the app, which is the reason why I'm so incredibly impressed with the app, is that they talk about the level of awareness, looking for the one that is looking, etc.
Right.
These are concepts that you wouldn't think would be presented to such a wide audience.
Right.
And there's very good reason why one should be concerned with how to relay these concepts in a way that doesn't put off your average student of meditation. Right. And at the same time, they're so important that you can't do a teaching without them. Yeah. Because they're the core of the teaching. Whether you're talking about Dzogchen, Rinzai, Soto Zen, etc. Getting to the core of no self and getting to the core of transcending or dissolving the ego is the core of the practice. Right. This idea that if you're thinking, you're suffering. If you're identified with the self, you're suffering. Regular mindfulness, reducing the heart rate, getting into a calm state is just the entry level of the whole practice. And at some point you want to go deeper, and I think that's the key thing about this app. And I think that's what is an interesting conversation, is how are most people, if they're coming from a Judeo-Christian background or just a few years into it, how do they not get scared away by these concepts, right? Which are the core of the teaching. I
do feel, though, that's the amazing thing about the app, is that it's so accessible to so many people. There are just so many teachers, and you can find something that works for you. But also that, this ability to access it at any time. When you do it on your own, like I just came back from Deer Park Monastery for the Lunar New Year. Of course, I am so lucky to be able to access that and go and just spend time with monastics who embody this life style. But, when I can't do that, which is most of the time because I'm at work, I can turn on this app, and it helps me on the day-to-day level, as well as other things, of course, books, etc., from my local library. But I do feel like the accessibility of this is incredible. Like, I've never seen this kind of knowledge come together in one place where I can sample these masters from around the world.
Yeah, you're right. And for that, to that point, I don't think there is another place where there is. You would have to compile. I mean, you could have a bookshelf with every book from every master.
Right.
But this is audio, which is incredible.
Right.
And it's directly accessible. I mean, I listen to it on my commute sometimes, and what I've been surprised by for myself is even to the degree with which the moments section, where this quick 2 to 3 minute audio clip can change my state of mind or how I'm seeing some event happen. And so I think you're right. And I think at the end of the day, the question then becomes, if you have all this wisdom, how do you apply it? In other words, because you want actual results day to day of, hey, I'm actually navigating my life in a with evidence of being more compassionate, more skillful in everyday situations, having more peace, or as Ram Dass said, he said something like non-reactive awareness. I'm the loving awareness,
or inner being, as
exactly.
Thich Nhat Hanh says.
Yeah. So you want to become that, and you want more being and less doing, and you want to be cultivating more presence in every action that you do, so that ultimately you're suffering less and you're living,
creating less suffering. And you're
absolutely living and enjoying your life fully. That is the evidence of your practice,
a skillful practice.
So I think that's another really fascinating area that we can all watch is, okay, week by week, am I, progress is a tough word because you have the whole debate also of gradual versus, sudden enlightenment, etc. But I mean, we should want to see some evidence year by year, right? I know the Dalai Lama said, check your progress every 10 years. but we should want to see some evidence week by week that we're somehow suffering less, which is a great indicator, and we're enjoying our lives more and our relationships, which is probably the most important part of any of our lives.
Well,
are
certainly,
getting better.
Skillfully navigating our lives, and so that we're not creating suffering and in ourselves and in everyone else and everything else. Right? So this is an incredible tool to that end.
It really is, because the primary project, when you think about it as a human being, is you're interacting with other people, yet theoretically you have no self, but you're having all of these interactions, and you would want for them to be more loving and enjoyable, and to dissolve yourself into each interaction. And this
takes skill, by the way.
It takes practice and skill. And the other arena with which is very interesting that's happening on the app right now, which they're getting into retreats that you can do digitally on the app, and that you can do live with others. But that brings into the other question of, should anyone do a retreat? How long should they do it for? Is it worth disconnecting from life for several days?
I can attest that it is.
Yeah, I think
I think you can too.
Yeah, but of course
you have so much practical experience.
I mean, I can attest to the fact that I think even if I know Sam's recommendation is to do a minimum of 5 days of silent retreat, because that's where you really get into the deeper silence. But I think in my case, even 2 or 3 days of disconnecting from the so-called reality or the world and going into some sort of silent retreat experience is tremendously helpful, and can be a reminder that there's a deeper space of stillness that we can draw from. And it's like a bank that you can build up, which is why I like the fact that on the app they're also recommending this. It's interesting, right? It's a bit paradoxical, because Dzogchen, etc., says waking up happens right now. It's right on the surface.
Right.
You know, within a finger snap, you can notice the universality of everything.
Everything.
And one,
the
and
connectivity,
yet, we still need to practice going into silence and developing longer practices of building our attention and focus and concentration.
Certainly. This is not something you can do overnight.
Right.
You need a daily practice in order to actually manifest that as well as access it, right? So we it's not an easy thing to access unless you practice. So this is another thing that the app helps you with, is just on a daily level, just helping you practice.
Yeah, and I think that's the key. The key thing that the app pushes, which is great, is that any activity that you want to do, whether it's being more skillful at work, or maybe you'd like to get better at swimming or writing or etc. These are all things that you're going to be doing out in the world.
Right.
But if you don't, if you're not able to first develop the presence to dissolve the so-called self or reduce your thinking while you're doing those activities, then you might not be doing them fully or with the most presence that you could do, and you might not be enjoying them as much as you could be.
Right.
Maybe a classic example is cooking a meal, right? Which is why they put people at retreat centers sometimes in the position of kitchen helper, or, to learn how you can chop, vegetables without listening to, music or a podcast on your headphones.
Right.
To just completely chop the carrots.
Yes. Be one with the carrot.
Right, exactly. Now, it's one thing to listen to that instruction literally.
Right. But it's another thing to do it.
Yes. And I think that's what this practice is really coming down to, is how to embody all of these great teachers and their wisdom. That should be the effect of the app, right? Because on a larger level, as the app becomes more popular, we would like to see the product of people practicing in our daily lives. I mean, the classic example is just when you interact with people in a city that you live in, whether you're passing them on the sidewalk or in the car.
The ripple effect of...
at the grocery store, etc. How mindful is our society as a whole? Let's be honest.
Gotcha.
We're sort of failing that test, right?
Indeed. For most places, I think. Yeah. Although some are better than others, for sure. But here we are in Los Angeles.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
and I know that.
I know we're both from different places. You're up in the Northwest, and I was in Berkeley for a good part of my life. So we come from a different place altogether.
And you've got that interesting history where I know your grandfather was, I believe, a chair of East Asian studies at Berkeley, right?
Yeah, he started that back in the day. But I was lucky to get that kind of grounding in Eastern philosophy quite young. But sounds like you were too, with your father being a Zen. Yeah,
I think of both of those instances as being quite lucky to be in some ways like a second generation Buddhist. My father having done 30, 40 retreats and been very involved since the early 80s in Rinzai Zen Buddhism, and so in other words, not having to work through a set of conditioning from Judeo-Christian beliefs, and always sort of intimately knowing the importance of studying Eastern philosophy and Buddhist philosophy primarily, and it gives you sort of a head start to working with those concepts, which again, going back to the beginning, are if you're just hearing them for the first time, the idea of emptiness, the idea of the self being illusion, could be quite overwhelming and hard to grasp and hard to believe.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, our society is starting to support mindfulness more and more, as we see it's coming into. I saw a Time article recently that brought up mindfulness, so it's entering the mainstream in a big way. But if you don't come from a society that has that as sort of the backbone I saw the difference when I lived in Japan after high school. Zen infuses their daily life, and in doing that, it is so much more accessible, right? Whereas here, materialism and a whole different way of being infuses our daily life. So it's a lot harder to access this, right? As we see on a day-to-day basis here in Los Angeles.
Yeah, exactly. If you think about the environment that we're in, what does it reinforce? I mean, everywhere we go, obviously, people are getting their attention pulled by their phones or advertising,
right.
or widespread consumerism. That the next thing you buy or the next trip you buy is going to be the thing that does it for
you, right?
and the longer you've practiced, you understand that to be untrue,
right.
because just by virtue of understanding the true nature of impermanence, that any experience that you have isn't going to last. There's no experience that is finally going to do it.
Right.
And I think that is sort of the opposite by which our culture, we're talking specifically about West Coast USA right now.
Right.
And so the app in some ways is definitely going so-called against the stream. You're really sort of doing a practice that isn't the norm.
Right.
We should say, at this point at least.
Right.
And for that reason, it's difficult to keep up, and I think, they took away the streaks function on the app, which is where you could build up how many days in a row that you meditated. But I think what I like about Sam's teaching on the app is that he even emphasizes that he doesn't have a regular practice where he's like, okay, I do 10 minutes or 30 minutes a day.
Right.
And more he's trying to dissolve the line. And this is so important between his practice and regular life.
Well, I mean, because every moment can be a practice, isn't that right?
Right.
You can sit and breathe, or you can wash the dishes mindfully, or, all these things. These are the things we were being taught. We're being taught that every moment can be part of your practice. So, and you can access that anytime. Of course, there's nothing like sitting on the cushion, but, that's not always available to you. So we have to take what we can get.
Yeah, I think more than anything this year, after trying, practicing with degrees of success over 2 decades, is that I've realized more and more when I go into, let's say, a half hour of sitting silent or something, that's not going to be perfect, but that's also sort of like lifting weights. It's just a practice you do so that when you enter the world with others and you're interacting at work, etc., you somehow have this deeper reservoir of non-reactivity, and it's very similar to just going to a gym and lifting stronger weights.
Right.
Your mind becomes more and more still,
adept
at encountering experiences that are going to cause agitation or aversion, etc. And you become more adept at not reacting to them instantaneously, and reacting to them more skillfully. Right. And I think, this is such an important part of the practice, is this idea that it's not one mind state that you go into, the Zendo or the meditation room, etc. And you're this peaceful being, and then you walk out into the world.
You maintain,
Yeah, this idea that every moment is your practice, because on a more philosophical level, but also on a very true level, we have no idea when our lives are going to end. So the point being that not knowing how much time we have is a very crucial thing to admit and to face, that these lives are happening now, and you are not this individual subject detached from your life, disconnected from everybody, disconnected from nature. This is the primary cause of suffering. If I observe,
certainly
people in the world, myself included, have had feelings like that here and there.
Certainly.
And so
that's the nature of being human, right?
Right.
And just recognizing that we're connected is is the answer to that.
Right, and to deeply recognize it,
Right.
and to deeply be able to sort of, I don't necessarily like the cliche term become one, but if, let's say you're on a hike or you're walking, let's just say you're walking down your block in your neighborhood, to see a tree or a person and to somehow realize that you're a part of this river of consciousness.
Yes.
You're not, like, as they would say on the
The
app,
ever-changing
you're not
river.
standing on the bank of the river.
Right.
You are the river that is occurring.
Right.
Can reduce your self-consciousness, can reduce your hyper-obsession with everything turning out perfect in your life.
Oh my goodness.
Which we all have.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
How do we, many of the teachers have talked about this on the app, but how do we drop into a feeling of accepting what's happening as it is and not wishing for each moment to be different? And that is another hour that we could probably talk about.
Yeah, certainly.
But see, but
Yeah.
when I say that, it's very clear in everybody's mind.
Right.
This is the mind state I'm constantly in, wishing
Right.
for a different future, wishing the past had gone a certain way.
Uh-huh.
And there's no way to be in the past or the future unless you're thinking, right?
Right.
So without that conceptual thinking mind,
Right.
then we can relax into a moment.
Right.
I'm just sitting here, there's a mosquito on my, face, whatever, and it's perfectly the way that this moment is supposed to happen now, right? And when you do that, it causes you to laugh, perhaps.
Yes,
a little
it does.
bit, right? and so it is an interesting question fundamentally underneath this, underneath the ego self that wishes for everything to be a certain way. It is somehow humorous, isn't it?
It is. It's humorous. Yeah, that we spend so much time in our heads when being here with, as you say, that tree or that other person or whatever it is that's there with you in that moment is what we're striving to do better here.
Right.
And what these masters help us understand.
Yeah, and so thankful for teachers. I think one thing in this century that we're lucky to have is a couple thousand years of people that have done the practice, have gone into caves
to be able to
for 6
access
months.
that, when other people in times past could only be with the one teacher.
No, I will say, I think without a doubt that, and I'm not embellishing this, that I think it's the most important app in the App Store for, anyone to have. And I love that I can say that without it being, there's Google Maps and things you need tools to get around. But this is a major philosophical tool which answers the question of what does it mean to be human, and what is the most skillful way to live one's life? What is more important to have in your toolkit? From the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed. That is urging you to, hey, take the risk to breathe, to deeply gain insight into the nature of human living and of being a human being. And to have some experiences before you pass of
interconnectedness,
relaxing into the beauty and the joy that is there to be had in life. And because it is available, these teachers have told us, this is right in front of you.
It is you, right?
It is you. Not only is it right in front of you, it is you. If you have the sincerity or the genuine desire to practice, then it can become available to you, and that is a really interesting thing to be able to relate to anyone, because who do you know that hasn't suffered or isn't suffering in some way?
Everyone, isn't it?
And there's this obviously this debate between whether the Buddha said everything is suffering, or I like the term more that everything is in some ways unsatisfactory if you cling to it, if you approach any phenomenon in the world with clinging or with desire to change it, it will be unsatisfactory.
And ironically, also the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. So it has this, as we say, duality, the constant duality of everything.
And the idea that this isn't an easy practice either. So like we can read and we can listen to these teachings, you know, don't cling. Don't think too much about the past and the future, right? But practicing them is another thing, and I think that's the key thing that would, you know, to wrap this up, that would be interesting about a weekly radio show or whatever they want to evolve with the Waking Up app, is that they can say, okay, here's this week in Waking Up, let's talk about different ways that we're approaching the ability to transform all of these great teachings into our daily experience of living and practicing life. What are some ways that listeners have found works for that? Or, you know, what are some ways that you can approach trying to retreat, etc.? Because at the end of the day, right, the whole goal is that this stuff is translated into your daily life.
Every day.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think I'm still figuring that out and experiencing it myself after a couple of decades.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think so.
But it does feel like there's these 2% increments where you're like, I made a little bit of a leap there.
Right.
And that was meaningful in my life. And I do feel like
this has helped. Yeah.
Over
this has
the
helped
past
me hugely.
4 or 5 years of working with the app, I have been able to not just theoretically let go more, but actually let go of experiences and phenomena much better than I used to. And that's, as he says in the app, it's an incredible skill to have.
Right.
You know. And with that being said, we're going to have to let go of this.
This moment together.
This moment.
Always a pleasure, Nick.
Always great talking with you, Deeya, and I'll see you at work.
Okay, see you at work.